April 12, 1961. A date that changed the world. Yuri Gagarin, a 27-year-old Soviet pilot, became the first human being to travel into space. He orbited the Earth for 108 minutes. He returned a hero. His face was plastered on every newspaper, every television screen, every propaganda poster from Moscow to Havana. The Soviet Union had won the space race. America was humiliated, and Gagarin became one of the most famous people on the planet. But here is the question that has haunted conspiracy theorists for 60 years. Was Yuri Gagarin really the first? What if, before his famous flight, other cosmonauts had already traveled into space? What if some of them never came back? What if their deaths were erased from history to protect Soviet pride? And what if two Italian brothers, sitting in a disused German bunker with scavenged radio equipment, recorded their final desperate moments? Welcome to Reddit Tea. I'm your host, and every week, we brew a fresh cup of Reddit's darkest, strangest, and most unforgettable stories. Today, we are diving into one of the most haunting conspiracy theories of the Cold War. The Lost Cosmonauts. The men and women who may have traveled to the stars, and paid the ultimate price in secret. Let me take you back to the beginning. The space race was not just a competition. It was a war. A war fought with rockets instead of rifles, with satellites instead of soldiers. The Soviet Union and the United States were desperate to prove that their system, their ideology, their way of life, was superior. And the prize for winning? The heavens themselves. The Soviet space program, known as OKB-1, was a secretive organization. Even its name was classified. The engineers worked behind closed doors. The cosmonauts trained in hidden facilities. The launches happened under the cover of secrecy. Everything was need to know. And the public did not need to know. This culture of secrecy is the foundation of the Lost Cosmonauts theory. If something went wrong, the Soviet Union would never admit it. Failures would be hidden. Deaths would be denied. History would be rewritten. And according to the theory, history was rewritten multiple times. To understand this theory, you need to understand the pressure the Soviet Union was under. The Cold War was at its peak. The United States had already launched its first satellite, Explorer-1, in 1958. The Soviets had launched Sputnik a few months earlier, but the Americans were catching up fast. President John F. Kennedy had promised to put a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s. The Soviets knew they could not let the Americans win. They needed a victory. A big one. Sending the first human into space would be that victory. But rocket science is dangerous. Rockets explode. Capsules fail. Cosmonauts die. And every failure, if made public, would be a propaganda disaster. So the Soviets did what they always did. They hid the failures. They celebrated the successes. And if someone died, they simply erased them. Now, let me introduce you to the two men who claimed to have heard the truth. Achille Judica-Cordiglia was born in 1933. His younger brother, Giovanni Battista, was born in 1939. They grew up in Turin, Italy, a city in the northwest of the country. They were not scientists. They were not spies. They were simply two brothers who were obsessed with space. In the late 1950s, space exploration was the most exciting thing happening in the world. The Sputnik satellite had shocked the West. Laika the dog had orbited the Earth. Every launch was front-page news. The brothers wanted to listen for themselves. So they did something extraordinary. They scavenged military surplus equipment from abandoned bases. Radios. Antennas. Wires. Spare parts. They built their own listening post. And they set it up in a location that seemed like something out of a spy novel. A disused German bunker. The bunker was located at a site called Torre Bert, near Turin. It was cold, damp, forgotten, perfect for their purposes. They installed a 40-foot octagonal dish antenna on the roof. They hooked up their homemade receivers. And they started listening. What they claimed to hear would shake the foundations of the Soviet space program. Between 1960 and 1964, The Judica-Cordiglia brothers said they intercepted transmissions from multiple secret Soviet space missions. Missions that never appeared in any official history. Missions that ended in tragedy. Let me walk you through their most disturbing recordings, one by one. The first recording came in May 1960. The brothers said they heard a cosmonaut in distress. His capsule had veered off course. He was lost in space. There was nothing anyone could do. The transmission faded. The cosmonaut was never heard from again. The second recording came in November 1960. This one was different. It was not a voice. It was a sound that sent chills down the brothers' spines. Morse code. SOS. 3 dots. 3 dashes. 3 dots. Over and over again. A spacecraft in trouble, sending out the universal distress signal. The brothers recorded it. They played it for anyone who would listen. SOS to the entire world. That was the message. The third recording is the one that haunts people the most. February 1961. Just 2 months before Yuri Gagarin's historic flight. The brothers captured the slow, agonizing death of a cosmonaut, suffocating alone in space. They described the recording as a man groaning, breathing heavily, trying to speak, but unable to form words. Then silence. The cosmonaut was gone. If this recording is real, it means that a human being died in space weeks before Gagarin ever left the ground. And no one was supposed to know. The brothers claimed there were more recordings. Many more. October 1961. A capsule veered off course and vanished into deep space. The cosmonaut's last words were faint calls for help that grew quieter and quieter until there was nothing. November 1962. A capsule bounced off the Earth's atmosphere like a stone skipping across water. It careened into deep space. The cosmonaut was lost forever. April 1964. A capsule burned up on re-entry. The cosmonaut died in a fireball that no one on the ground was supposed to see. But perhaps the most heartbreaking recording came in May 1963. The brothers said they recorded the voice of a female cosmonaut. A woman. Her capsule was burning up during re-entry. Her last words, translated from Russian, were chilling. I see a flame. I am hot. I am hot. Then silence. If this recording is authentic, it suggests that the Soviet Union sent a woman into space 2 full years before Valentina Tereshkova's official flight in June 1963. And that woman died a terrible death while the world watched Gagarin smile for the cameras. The Judica-Cordiglia brothers were not the only ones pointing to evidence of lost cosmonauts. In 1959, a high-ranking Czechoslovakian Communist Party official allegedly leaked information about secret Soviet space shots. He named names: Alexei Ledovsky, Andrei Mitkov, Sergei Shibarin, Maria Gromova. According to the leak, all 4 had perished on suborbital flights. For years, Western intelligence agencies took these claims seriously. The CIA even investigated, but they could never confirm the deaths. Then came the most famous name in the Lost Cosmonauts theory: Vladimir Ilyushin. If you have never heard of Vladimir Ilyushin, do not feel bad. History has almost forgotten him. But in April 1961, his name was on the lips of conspiracy theorists around the world. Vladimir Ilyushin was the son of Sergei Ilyushin, one of the Soviet Union's most famous aircraft designers. Sergei Ilyushin had designed some of the most successful military planes of World War II. He was a hero of socialist labor. He was close to Stalin himself. Vladimir grew up in the shadow of his famous father. He became a test pilot. A hero of the Soviet Union, in fact. He had been awarded the country's highest honor for testing new military aircraft. He was brave, skilled, and respected. But here is where the story gets strange. On April 10, 1961, 2 days before Yuri Gagarin's flight, a British communist newspaper called the Daily Worker published an unusual report. The paper claimed that Vladimir Ilyushin had been seriously injured in a car accident. He had broken both his legs. He was being treated in a hospital in Moscow. At first, this seemed like a normal news story, Test pilots get into accidents. It happens. But conspiracy theorists noticed something suspicious about the timing. According to the Lost Cosmonauts theory, Ilyushin had not been in a car accident. He had been the first human in space. He had orbited the Earth on April 7, 1961, 5 days before Gagarin. The mission, according to the theory, went wrong. A guidance malfunction caused Ilyushin's capsule to crash land in China. He was critically injured. The Soviet Union could not announce his flight as a success because he was too hurt to appear in public. So they invented the car accident cover story. He was sent to Hangzhou, China, for rehabilitation using traditional Chinese medicine. The cover story was complete. Proponents of the theory point to several pieces of supporting evidence. First, a doctor named Dr. Oleg Dobrovolsky claimed that Ilyushin had told him about the secret flight while being treated in a hospital. Dobrovolsky later repeated this story to multiple researchers. He seemed credible. He had no obvious reason to lie. Second, a group of amateur researchers produced a film called The Cosmonaut Cover-Up in 2010, which laid out the case for Ilyushin's mission. The film included interviews with former Soviet officials, doctors, and intelligence officers. It was compelling. Third, the Soviet Union had a documented history of lying about cosmonaut deaths. If they lied about Bondarenko, why not about Ilyushin? Fourth, there's the matter of the missing cosmonauts. The original Soviet cosmonaut group had 20 members. By the time Gagarin flew, several of them had disappeared from the official record. Where did they go? What happened to them? These questions have never been fully answered. Which brings us to the Bondarenko case. If you want to understand why the Lost Cosmonauts theory is so persistent, you need to know about Valentin Bondarenko. Bondarenko was a young Soviet pilot selected for the very first cosmonaut group. He was one of 20 candidates chosen to train for spaceflight. He was talented, ambitious, full of potential. On March 23, 1961, less than 3 weeks before Yuri Gagarin's flight, Bondarenko was in a pressure chamber at a top-secret training facility in Moscow. The chamber was filled with pure oxygen. That was standard for training. It simulated the atmosphere inside a spacecraft. But pure oxygen is also extremely flammable. And Bondarenko made a fatal mistake. He removed a medical sensor attached to his chest. He tossed it aside. The sensor landed on an electric hot plate inside the chamber. In an oxygen-rich environment, the fire was instantaneous. Bondarenko was engulfed in flames. The pressure chamber was sealed from the outside. His comrades could only watch helplessly as he burned to death. He died 10 hours later in a hospital. He was 24 years old. Here is the crucial detail. The Soviet Union hid Bondarenko's death for 25 years. For a quarter of a century, no one outside the Soviet space program knew that a cosmonaut had died in training. His name was erased. His photo was removed from official materials. He simply disappeared from history. When the truth finally came out in 1986, the world was shocked. The Soviet Union had lied about a cosmonaut's death for decades. If they could hide Bondarenko, what else were they hiding? This is the central argument of the Lost Cosmonauts theory. The Soviet space program was built on secrecy. They had the means to hide failures. They had the motivation to protect their image. And they had already proven they would do it with Bondarenko. So why not with actual space flights? There is another cosmonaut who was airbrushed from history. His name was Grigory Nelyubov. Nelyubov was one of the original 20 cosmonauts. He appeared in famous photographs with Gagarin and the others. In early 1961, he was considered a top candidate for an early spaceflight. But in late 1961, something strange happened. Nelyubov was removed from the program. His face was airbrushed out of official photographs. For years, Western observers speculated that he had died in a secret space mission. The truth was different. And it was sad. Nelyubov and 2 other cosmonauts had gotten drunk at a train station in Moscow. They got into a fight with soldiers. The incident was a scandal. Nelyubov was expelled from the program. He became an alcoholic. He lost everything. In 1966, he stepped in front of a train and died. The Soviet Union airbrushed him out of photos to erase the embarrassment. Not because he died in space, but because he died of shame. For conspiracy theorists, this was proof of the Soviet willingness to rewrite history. For skeptics, it was proof that there was always a mundane explanation for the mysteries. Now let me present the case against the Lost Cosmonauts. Because a good conspiracy theory requires both sides. If the Soviet Union launched secret space missions before Gagarin, there would have been evidence. Not just recordings from two Italian brothers. Physical evidence. Radar tracks. Satellite imagery. Something. The United States had extensive tracking capabilities during the Cold War. The NORAD radar network could detect launches from anywhere in the world. If the Soviets had launched a crewed mission before April 1961, the Americans would have known about it. Yet no American records show any such launches. Furthermore, since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia has opened many of its archives. Historians have pored over the documents. They have interviewed surviving engineers and cosmonauts. No one has found any evidence of lost cosmonauts. Mark Wade, who runs the Encyclopedia Astronautica, one of the most comprehensive sources on space history, says this: "The entire early history of the Soviet manned space program has been declassified. Ilyushin is not one of them." The Judica-Cordiglia recordings have also been heavily criticized. Experts who have analyzed the tapes point out several problems. First, the cosmonauts on the recordings do not follow standard Soviet communication protocols. They use incorrect call signs and non-standard phrases. This suggests the recordings were made by people who did not know how real cosmonauts talked. Second, there are grammatical errors in the Russian. Native Russian speakers say the phrases sound odd, unnatural. Like someone who learned Russian as a second language, or like someone faking a Russian accent. Third, the brothers never produced the original tapes for independent analysis. They played copies. Copies that could have been altered. Copies that could have been faked entirely. Fourth, the timing of their recordings is suspicious. They always seem to capture the most dramatic moments just when the space race was heating up. It was very convenient. And what about Vladimir Ilyushin? He lived until 2010. He never claimed to have flown in space. He never supported the conspiracy theories about himself. He lived a quiet life, working as a test pilot and later as an engineer. If he had truly been the first man in space, why would he stay silent for 50 years? Most historians now dismiss the Lost Cosmonauts theory as a product of Cold War paranoia and the Judica-Cordiglia brothers' desire for attention. But here is the thing about conspiracy theories. They do not die just because experts say they are false. The Lost Cosmonauts theory persists for a simple reason. We want to believe it. We want to believe that there are secrets hidden in the archives. We want to believe that history is not as clean and simple as the textbooks tell us. We want to believe that there were heroes who died in the shadows, their sacrifice hidden from the world. And the Soviet Union gave us plenty of reasons to be suspicious. They hid Bondarenko's death for 25 years. They airbrushed Nelyubov out of photographs. They lied about almost everything related to their space program until the very moment they could not lie anymore. If you grow up in a system where lying is the default, it is rational to assume that the lies go deeper than you know. There is also the human element. The Judica-Cordiglia brothers were not professional spies. They were amateurs, enthusiasts. They spent their own money on equipment. They sat in a cold bunker for hours, listening to static, hoping to hear something historic. If they faked the recordings, they did an incredibly elaborate job. And they never made any money from it. They never wrote a best-selling book. They never sold the rights to a movie. They just told their story and let the world decide what to believe. Giovanni Battista Judica-Cordiglia died in 2024. He was interviewed many times over the years. He never changed his story. He never admitted to faking anything. He always said the same thing. We recorded what we recorded. The cosmonauts died. The world just does not want to know. So where does that leave us today? There is no smoking gun. No declassified document that proves the lost cosmonauts existed. No body recovered from a secret crash site. No confession from an aging Soviet general. But there is also no proof that they did not exist. The Soviet archives may still hold secrets. Russia has not released everything. Perhaps, someday, a document will surface that changes everything. Or perhaps the truth is that Gagarin really was first, and the Italian brothers were just two men with too much time and too much imagination. Before I end, let me ask you something. Do you believe the lost cosmonauts existed? Do you think the Judica-Cordiglia brothers really heard the deaths of secret cosmonauts? Or were they faking it for attention? And what about the suffocation recording? If it is real, it is one of the most haunting sounds ever captured. If it is fake, it is one of the most elaborate hoaxes in history. Let me know your theories in the comments. I read every single one. Before you go, remember this. Yuri Gagarin became a hero. But if the lost cosmonauts existed, they became ghosts. Their names erased. Their sacrifices forgotten. Their families left with nothing but silence. If you want more deep dives into history's strangest mysteries, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Share this video with someone who loves space, conspiracy theories, or just a good story. That is how small channels grow. One share at a time. Thank you for watching Reddit T. Same channel. Same tea. New mystery. I will see you in the next video.